Cruz,
Larry, how you doing?
There is a very good friend of mine, Senator Ted Cruz. In all seriousness, I don't want to make light of these numbers. I finally found my CPI sheet. But this is the third month in a row, as you probably know, where inflation was much hotter than Wall Street expected. Yep. The numbers have jumped now, sir, to 4.5% at an annual rate for the last 3 months. And I'll read you this other number. Since January of 2021, so during the Biden tenure, the consumer price index level is up 19.4%. That is a very big number. And if I annualize that, sir, over the 38 months, it's 6.1% at an annualized rate. That would be the highest since the early 1980s. The only difference was, in the early 1980s, Ronald Reagan was bringing inflation down from 15%. Yep. Right now, inflation, which had come down a bit on a year-to-year change, is going back up again. And meanwhile, working folks are suffering declining real wages. Both hourly earnings and weekly earnings are down. What do you make of this? There's an economic take here, sir, but there's a political take also.
Well, these are terrible numbers for Joe Biden. They're terrible numbers for the Senate Democrats and House Democrats. You know, it speaks volumes that the White House is no longer using the phrase Bidenomics. They tried to roll that out there. They thought it was a good thing. The American people said, wait a second, Bidenomics is a train wreck. It is a disaster. When you look at inflation, this is what happens when you spend trillions of dollars you don't have, when you print trillions of dollars you don't have, when you borrow trillions of dollars you don't have. Inflation, and by the way, you and I and many others said at the time when the Democrats went on a wild spending spree, you're going to get inflation, you're going to drive costs up. And they insisted, nope, that's not at all. Remember, they had all these talking points about how it was transitory, it wasn't going to happen. Well, it has been persistent. And I'll tell you, every family at home, if you go to the grocery store, you've noticed that buying food for your family is an extra $100, $150. If you fill up your gas tank, you've certainly noticed the difference at the gas pump. If you pay your bills, whether it's electricity, whether it's health care, whether it's credit cards, the cost of everything has gone up. And I'll tell you two groups in particular that are really feeling the pain of Bidenomics. One is seniors, those on fixed incomes, who are discovering that their costs, their everyday monthly costs are going up and up and up, and their incomes aren't keeping pace. And it's really hurting seniors badly. And the second group that's being badly hurt by Bidenomics are young people. You got a lot of young people coming out of school. They've never known inflation. Suddenly the cost of their rent they can barely afford. You get a young married couple that wants to buy their first home, and they're discovering right now they can buy half the house they thought they could, because a 2.5% interest rate on a mortgage is very, very different from a 7% rate. This is what Bidenomics is.
I knew it. I knew you could go right through it. You know, by the way, just saying, grocery prices up more than 20%. Energy prices up close to 40%, Senator, as you probably know. Gasoline now head back towards $4 nationwide. A lot of these states out west and so forth are well over $5. Anyway, thank you for that rundown. The stock market got whacked also. Senator, let me go back to some of the biggest news of yesterday and today. The Arizona Supreme Court made a ruling to uphold a near total ban on abortion. Let me play to you Donald Trump had a comment on that. You know, he came out and said it should be up to the states. Let me just play a quick sound from Donald Trump on this Arizona abortion ruling.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, did Arizona go too far? Did Arizona go too far?
Yeah, they did, and that'll be straightened out. And as you know, it's all about states' rights. That'll be straightened out. And I'm sure that the governor and everybody else are going to bring it back into reason, and that will be taken care of, I think, very quickly.
All right, Senator Cruz, two questions. Number one, do you agree with Mr. Trump that Arizona went too far? And secondly, do you agree with Mr. Trump's new generic position, which he announced Monday, that essentially Arizona is a states' rights, abortion is a states' rights issue?
Well, listen, on the first question, I think that's a question for the voters of Arizona to decide. And I have been saying for a long time that issues like abortion, and this is what the Supreme Court said in the Dobbs decision, Those are issues on which people of good faith disagree, and disagree strongly, passionately. It's a very personal and emotional issue. I'm pro-life. There are many people who are passionately pro-life, many people who are passionately pro-choice. And what the Supreme Court said is on issues like that, the Constitution leaves it to the voters to decide. It shouldn't be 9 unelected judges issuing an edict for the country. Rather, every voter should decide. And what that means right now is in bright blue states, in states like New York and California, you continue to have essentially unlimited abortion on demand. In redder states, you get more meaningful restrictions, and the particular place the line is drawn, what the nature of those restrictions are, varies depending on the values and the mores of the citizens of those states. And so this decision from the Arizona Supreme Court is not going to be the last word on the topic. The voters in Arizona are going to decide. The governor in Arizona has already called for legislation. I could certainly see the Arizona legislature acting to decide what the rules should be in the state of Arizona. And that's when our framers wrote the Constitution, that's what they envisioned, that on issues where we've got sharp disagreements like this, it ought to be democracy making the decision, not a decree from on high.
So basically, you think Republicans, I'm just thinking about Republicans now, will fall in behind Mr. Trump's view that the states should decide as per the Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court?
Well, listen, I've been saying a long time it's a question for the voters, and it's going to be decided primarily at the state level. That there is a place on the federal level for the outer extremes. So, for example, I and many others have voted in favor of banning partial birth abortion. Partial birth abortion, the overwhelming majority of Americans don't support. And at the extremes, Congress may act, but in the Senate, it takes 60 votes to move any legislation. So the only legislation that's going to get enacted federally is something that could command 60 votes, which means, other than the extremes, it is going to stay at the state level, state by state, other than banning some of the most horrific practices that are really beyond the pale and beyond the conscience for the overwhelming majority of Americans.
Let me move on. I got a couple more for you, sir. I want to talk about immigration and crime for a moment. Big story in today's New York Post. Okay, New York City, sanctuary city, has had so many problems. So you have 5 Venezuelans robbing a Target store, big Target store, on 70th and 3rd Avenue, which is a very fine neighborhood. So they robbed the store. All right, cops came in, first of all, and they started banging up the cops. That's point number 1. Then they finally got busted, but 4 of them were let out with no bail, and the 5th one was let out with a very small bail. These are criminals. They are repeaters. They are recidivists. Now, here's the thing that's so amazing to me. They get let out of bail. All right, they had no problem. They get turned back on the streets. You know, Donald Trump, who did nothing with no victims, was charged $500 million to get out of his bail. They'll probably get, the Venezuelans will probably get at least a $10,000 refundable debit card. They'll get health care. They'll get food care. I mean, Senator Cruz, it pays to have a Venezuelan mask on or something. Because all they do is get lost. My question to you is, hasn't the time come for the United States policy here to deport criminals? Pure and simple. You make a crime, you get deported.
Larry, of course, and what happened in New York and what's happening every day in New York is an outrage. And I feel for the citizens of New York who are victims of violent crime because of Democrat policies. Number one, Joe Biden and every congressional Democrat that supports these open border policies that are releasing violent criminals into America. They're doing it day after day after day. And then number two, sanctuary city policies from Democrat politicians in New York and elsewhere that release violent criminals, usually without bail, after they've committed crimes. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I and several other Senate Republicans forced a vote on the Senate floor on whether we should deport illegal aliens who violently assault police officers. Now, listen, in any sane world, that ought to be a 100-0 vote. That ought to be a no-brainer. If you ask people on the street, if you ask ordinary people, everyone would say if you're a criminal illegal alien and you physically assault a police officer, of course we should deport you. Every single Senate Democrat voted no, a straight party line vote. Wow. This is where today's Democrat Party is that given a choice between protecting you, the citizen, or standing with the violent criminal. They side with the criminals, and it's making our streets much more dangerous.
Yes, sir. Last one I want to get to. I don't understand what part of the Supreme Court decision, which was made in English, as you know, the Supreme Court typically put their decisions out in the English language. What part of this language does President Biden not understand as he now attempts to cancel student loan, a ticket, Senator, that could come to $500 billion cost, a $500 billion cost if he gets his way. Can you explain this to me? There's a Constitution, there's the Supreme Court, they write in English, they couldn't be clear that he does not have the authority, and yet there he goes again. Senator Cruz, you're a scholar, you're a legal scholar, you're a Supreme Court clerk, et cetera, what don't they understand?
Look, he understands perfectly what the court said. He just doesn't care, and this administration doesn't care. This decision is a trifecta. It's doing three things at once. Number one, blue-collar workers, working-class men and women. The most consequential political shift of the last decade is the Republican Party has become a blue-collar party. We are the party of truck drivers and steel workers and cops and firefighters and waiters and waitresses and everyone with calluses on their hands who works. The Democrat Party has abandoned blue-collar workers, has abandoned working men and women. And what this decision is doing is robbing blue-collar workers. If you're a truck driver, if you're a waitress, what Biden is saying is we're going to take money from you. We're going to take money from you either in the form of higher taxes or we're going to borrow and make you pay off that debt. But either way, they're taking it from you to pay off the debts of a bunch of woke gender studies majors because that's who the Democrat Party listens to. That's number one. They are screwing blue-collar workers. Number two, this decision, as you noted, is utterly lawless. The Supreme Court struck it down. The Biden White House knows what they're doing is lawless. You can't give away $500 billion or $1 trillion without Congress passing legislation. They don't care. They know it's lawless. They're doing it anyway. And number three, they are selling young people a bill of goods. Joe Biden's doing this for the same reason he did it 2 years ago, to try to buy votes, to convince young people, look, I'm giving you free stuff. But here's the thing. They know this will be struck down in court, so they're lying to young people. They're trying to dupe young people in making a promise that they know will never be delivered upon because the courts will strike it down. But the Biden administration thinks young people are not very bright and they'll be fooled by this political ploy. I don't think that'll happen.
Well, that's the beauty of this story. You know, judging from all these polls coming out, the younger folks ain't buying this at all. And they're walking away from Biden. I don't know if they're ready to go for Trump. Maybe they are, but they're walking away from Biden left and right. So I agree. By the way, did you know, Senator, and you may recall this, during the Obama years, they nationalized student loans, stopped private lenders, put them into the Department of Education, where there isn't a single person with banking or credit experience, in order to make loans so the interest would finance, the interest revenues would finance Obamacare. Obamacare. That's
was
the
an
greatest
Elizabeth
irony.
Warren special.
Yeah, I know. That's the
exactly
irony of this. Now they're stopping the interest expenses, so they're going to bankrupt Obamacare, as well as the rest of the country. Go figure. I don't know. Senator Cruz, good to see you, sir. Well done.
Thanks, Larry.
Well done on the economic questions. Very well done. High marks. All right.